Not a breeze, not a ripple. So I took her out. Felt relaxed and I felt confident. Suddenly I saw the old man, my father, through the windscreen. Suddenly he gave me that broad smile of his and he said, "Don't worry, old boy, there's nothing to fear."
Drama for the new season on BBC1.
On your marks.
Many thought it impossible. One man was to prove them wrong.
After your experience at Helsinki, do you think it's time you found a top coach, Roger?
There was nothing wrong with my training methods, and I will not be looking for a coach.
I cried when you got beat.
56, 57, 58, 59.
It means the race for the 4-minute mile is well and truly on, Roger, well and truly on.
You are the greatest miler in the world. Your only problem is that you don't believe it.
Michael York stars in the 4-minute mile beginning next Sunday at 9:05 and continuing the following Tuesday at 9:30 on 1.
In 15 minutes, Everyman presents another chance to see No Easy Road, the words of Nelson Mandela applied to Michael Burke's very personal account of his 4 years as a BBC correspondent in South Africa. No Easy Road at 10:50. And that's after the news on BBC1 Now with Moira Stewart.
The electricians won't back down. The TUC warn you're on the brink. The tragedy of Bangladesh. The president says God is testing us. We need the world to help. Archbishop Tutu defies the government and risks a lengthy prison sentence. And the Navy destroyer holed in the Gulf, colliding with the ship she was supposed to escort. Good evening. The electricians are expected to be thrown out of the TUC when the annual Congress begins tomorrow. Their leader, Eric Hammond, today rejected a compromise which he described as an unacceptable fudge. And he said any attempt to expel the electricians from the Labour Party because the union was no longer affiliated to the TUC would be resisted through the courts. From Bournemouth, John Fryer.
The electricians have thought long and hard about the consequences of their action, so the chances of them drawing back at the 11th hour were never high. Despite that, there were attempts today to persuade them to accept a compromise, but that was swiftly dismissed as a fudge.
It's not our way of doing things. We say, look, this is what we feel about this matter, this is what we stand by. It might be strange, it might be new, it might be rough, tough, or whatever it is, but that's where we are.
The TUC's disciplining the electricians for breaking Congress rules. When there are disputes between unions, they're sorted out through a procedure dating back to the Bridlington Conference before the war. The electricians signed a deal with this company in South Wales, giving them sole recognition. The same thing happened at this plant in Warrington, and other unions complained they'd been elbowed aside. But the ETPUs refused to tear up the deals, despite being told by the TUC to do so. That, says the TUC, simply can't be tolerated.
We've had our 3 major unions in the last 12 months have had decisions against them. None of them liked it, all of them accepted it. And if you don't have that core of rule, if you don't have a sense of law and order, then all sorts of problems, almost anarchy breaks out. I'm not going to have that. And I think the ETPU have got to recognise that fact.
With expulsion now apparently a formality, the TUC is doing its best to minimise the damage, saying there'll be no membership war. And in a surprising statement, the transport workers leader said there are thin grounds for a second expulsion, this time from the Labour Party. The electricians, he said, haven't broken Labour Party rules. But that's only damage limitation. And tomorrow, when the electricians depart, the Labour movement will be badly split.
Britain's postal service will be disrupted again tomorrow. Informal talks have failed to end the dispute between the Union of Communication Workers and the Post Office. It's over plans to pay bonuses to new staff in the southeast. Tonight, most of the main sorting offices are at a standstill.
Letterboxes in the affected areas are still sealed tonight. They'll remain out of action until the 40,000 striking postal staff, almost a third of the total, go back to work. 28 major sorting offices are closed, including Glasgow, Manchester, Cardiff and several in London. Their staff have walked out in local protests against the use of temporary labour to clear the backlog caused by last week's national strike about bonus payments. 60 million letters and parcels are still stranded. The Post Office says it's not worth sending anything else to the affected areas until the dispute is over, and delays are certain elsewhere in the country. The scale of the disruption will become clearer in the morning.
I would hope tomorrow morning that there's discussions between our officials and managers to get a return to work formula. But what clearly isn't acceptable is having conditions imposed upon our members in those local offices. There'll have to be local agreements to resolve that situation.
Tonight in central London, the Post Office said they'd contact the union again tomorrow. This weekend there have been talks about talks. Real negotiations to end the dispute still haven't started.
It's now feared that 1,000 people may have died in the floods in Bangladesh. Another 25 million people are homeless. The floodwaters went down slightly today, but they still cover about 2/3 of the country. The Bangladeshi government has again asked for international aid. Our correspondent Mark Tully has just arrived in the capital, Dhaka.
Dhaka is a capital underwater. Boats are the only mode of transport. Bangladesh is no stranger to natural disasters, but these floods are the worst ever recorded. Normally, it's the villagers who suffer, but this time the cities are just as badly hit. The President, General Ershad, is seen on television every night personally inspecting the damage and the relief operations. He knows the political consequences could be grave if his government isn't seen to be coping with this crisis. There's an acute shortage of drinking water, and there's always the temptation to drink from the floods. Tens of thousands of cases of waterborne diseases have already been reported. The President has appealed for international aid, and Britain has promised supplies worth £500,000. International aid organisations are stressing the need for immediate assistance.
In the short term, food which can be eaten, cooked food in some form. We need water purifying tablets, ORS, oral rehydration salts, which help combat the effects of diarrhea, and also to help people in getting shelter. This is short term. In the long term, clearly the problems which have created the flooding, deforestation in the Himalayas, and the silting of the riverbeds have to be tackled in a very major way.
President Ershad has told this Muslim country that God is testing them. His people may accept that, but they're looking to the world to help them face their tests.
The Royal Navy destroyer HMS Southampton is in port in the United Arab Emirates tonight after being seriously damaged in a collision with a British merchant ship. The accident happened just outside the mouth of the Gulf. It involved the P&O container vessel the Torbay, bound for Dubai. The Southampton is now in Fujairah. The Southampton, part of the Navy's Armilla patrol, was apparently about to escort the Torbay into the Gulf when the accident happened. A hole was torn in the Southampton's side by the much larger container ship, and the Southampton's bridge was also badly damaged. 3 members of the crew suffered broken bones, and a number of others had minor injuries. The Torbay was able to continue on her journey while naval divers examined the Southampton's hull. Customs officers at Ramsgate in Kent have spent the day examining a Honduran-registered cargo vessel, the Salton Sea. It's suspected of smuggling cocaine. The crew, none of whom are thought to be British, are being questioned. The ship was caught after a chase across the channel in which French customs officers fired warning shots across her bows.
In the end, the arrest of the Salton Sea was relatively straightforward. She was brought into Ramsgate by an unarmed team of customs officers on board a cutter. Searching the boat, though, looks like being a longer problem. There's been a specialist rummage team on board for most of today, operating occasionally with more vigour than finesse. But that's only part of the search. There have been sniffer dogs sent through the cabins and living accommodation, and a succession of customs men crawling through the bilges. None, apparently, has come up with anything. During the afternoon, the French cutter which started the chase yesterday left Ramsgate after spending the night in port. The problem of the Salton Sea is now exclusively a British one. But the arrest was just another example of the close international cooperation that's been established whenever the customs believed that drugs could be involved. As soon as the search turned towards British waters, the customs here were informed so that they could take over the seizure of the ship. Late this afternoon, the main search team came off the boat, but today's operation was only the start. It could be several days before the customs are finished.
In South Africa, Archbishop Desmond Tutu has defied the government's emergency regulations. He called for a boycott of next month's segregated local elections. He could now be prosecuted for what the authorities may consider to be subversive statements. This report has been compiled under the South African restrictions.
Processing into his cathedral, Archbishop Tutu was preparing to deliver a sermon punishable by up to 10 years in prison. By urging people not to vote in next month's elections for racially segregated local councils, the Archbishop challenged President Botha on an issue where such challenges are simply illegal. The government, fighting for a high turnout, is spending millions of pounds urging black people to vote and give the councils legitimacy. Counter calls for a boycott have simply been outlawed. But from the pulpit, the Archbishop defied the law, insisting separate black councils for blacks and white councils for whites perpetuate apartheid.
I urge black people in this diocese not to vote in the October elections. And I hope that white Anglicans will join their black fellow Anglicans in that action. I am aware of the penalties attaching to this call. I am not defying the government. I am obeying God.
Now the government must decide its response. Only 2 days ago, the Law and Order Minister threatened to clip the wings of churchmen he called revolutionaries. Prosecuting Archbishop Tutu would provoke worldwide condemnation, but the minister hinted that prospect would not deter him.
The Northern Ireland Secretary, Tom King, has confirmed that 3 IRA terrorists killed in an ambush last Tuesday did fire first on the security forces. On BBC Radio, Mr. King said that terrorist weapons found at the scene had been fired. He said the security forces continued to fight under the rule of law, and added that the only shoot-to-kill policy in Northern Ireland was that of the IRA. The Health Secretary, Kenneth Clarke, has said the government will not give a blank cheque to the unions. In his first comments on nurses' pay since he returned from holiday, he said £803 million had been set aside for them, and he couldn't promise any more. It's expected that health authorities will tell the government tomorrow that's not enough. Mr. Clarke also said that some health authorities will run out of money this autumn, and that, he said, could lead to ward closures in hospitals. Tonight, Hector Mackenzie of the health union COSI said Mr. Clarke's complacency had confirmed his worst fears. The Farnborough Air Show opened today with extra emphasis on safety after last Sunday's disaster in West Germany. The Soviet Air Force were making the headlines in the air and on the ground.
This was the first time the public had been let in on Farnborough's opening day. And although everyone knew about last week's disaster at Ramstein, few admitted to having any qualms about coming to this show.
To be honest, when my husband said we're invited, we were friends here, I said, I don't think I'll go. He said, oh, we'll be all right. Everyone will be quite safe.
If they've seen the accident at Ramstein, then they will have implemented procedures here to ensure that there's no repetition.
The display line is clearly marked by vivid orange panels. And apart from takeoffs and landings, no aircraft is allowed closer than 500 feet from the crowd. As expected, the Russians stole the show with their MiG-29 Fulcrum fighter. An astonishing performance included a vertical stall, a maneuver hardly ever attempted by jet pilots. The Fulcrum is clearly a match for most NATO fighters. But there was disappointment for those waiting to see the flight of the Condor, the Antonov 124. As the world's biggest plane started its takeoff run, things went wrong. Experts said the engine had backfired. Provided it wasn't damaged, Condor should fly tomorrow. Farnborough display flights are intended mainly to impress customers. The last show produced £1 billion worth of new orders. This week, the total could be even higher.
Cricket, and England have beaten Sri Lanka in the Texaco One-Day International at the Oval. Sri Lanka made 242 for 7 in their 55 overs. England scored 245 for 5 with a couple of overs to spare.
The England bowlers had looked as though they might make a neat job of dismissing Sri Lanka quickly. Samarasekera bowled for 10. But as in the Test match, the Sri Lankan batsman proved entertaining to watch. Ranatunga again involved in a partnership to worry England and make this anything but a formality for the home side. He'd made 37 when he was finally run out, thanks to the rapid reactions of Kim Barnett. Ranatunga would probably have been safe had he not dropped his bat at the vital moment. While his partner Mendes scored 60 before going for one spectacular shot too many. But a very respectable total was already assured. In reply, England's task suddenly became a great deal harder when Gooch was caught after scoring just 7 runs. But as so often this season, Alan Lamb brought a sense of style to England's batting and turned the game. He'd made 66 when he was caught in much the same way as Gooch had been. But Barnett stayed a bit longer to score a patient 86. The Sri Lankans' keenness to win was unmistakable. But in the end, England's victory came fairly comfortably. A good note to end on, but for the England team, this has been a cricketing summer they'll want to forget.
And that's all from the newsroom this weekend. Good night.
Hello, this is Ernesto. You're ready and you didn't even know the hurricane season had started. But Ernesto is my friend and he will become your friend too as he fills and pushes warm air across the British Isles this coming week. So just when we all go back to work, it's going to start warming up. Not just yet though. Plenty of showers tonight over the northern half of Britain, some quite heavy ones too in the north, and at the other end of the country, some rain in the Channel Islands and later in the far southeast of England to mainly in Kent. In between dry and rather cool, 8 Celsius is 46 Fahrenheit. Tomorrow in the morning, showers over that northern half of Britain still some rain in the far southeast and the Channel Islands there. But gradually as we go through the day, the showers becoming very few and far between, the sun coming out in many parts of the country as well, brightening up near those southern coasts too, and most of us are becoming a degree or two warmer than we have done today. And the winds dying down slowly as well. 17 is 63 Fahrenheit, 21 in London is a pleasant 70 degrees Fahrenheit, and even warmer, we think, on Tuesday and Wednesday. Let me finish up with a summary of tomorrow's weather. Quite a sunny summary, and becoming sunnier as we go through the early part of the week. That's it. Good night.
And now, with news of the first panorama of the new season, here's Fred Emery.
The week Neil Kinnock faces the unions, Panorama reports on Labour's agonising policy review, which has provoked a challenge to Kinnock and accusations of betrayal.
There is, among the trade union and Labour leadership, a fear of socialism underneath.
Not so, say Kinnock's allies. They'll never implement any Labour policy unless they convince the voters.
That's what Labour's got to do. It's got to get ahead of Mrs. Thatcher, beat her at her own game.
But Kinnock's biggest upset may come from John Prescott, who's bidding to become a crusading deputy leader.
I hope that image comes across, and if it does, I think I shall win.
That's Labour's agonising reappraisal. Panorama tomorrow night at 9:30.
In 45 minutes, Tony Lewis introduces highlights from the oval of the international one-day cricket between England and Sri Lanka. This is BBC One. And now Everyman presents another chance to see Michael Burke's personal account of his 4 years as a BBC correspondent in South Africa. Viewers are warned that the film contains scenes of both verbal and physical violence. At one point, the film shows graphically the murder of a young man by a mob. It's a harrowing sequence, but crucial, we believe, to the film's purpose. No easy road.